And welcome to the Most Accurate Podcast. I'm not your normal host, John Daigle. I'm Anthony Stalter. Normally you see John and I on Fridays, but I'm pinch hitting today for John, so appreciate everybody joining us. Of course, with John Paulsen and Sam Hoppen. Again, I'm Anthony Stalter. And guys, I'm really looking forward to this discussion today because I feel like we have lots to break down. How you guys doing?
Doing well. We're almost halfway through the fantasy season. It's always the week 8, and then now we've got 17 weeks in the fantasy season, so it gets to be somewhere in the middle by week 9. But excited to make a push for the playoffs. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm good. We've had a lot of injuries this year, obviously, but this seemed like the first week that a lot of them sort of shook the fantasy landscape for more than just some of the week-to-week guys. So certainly a lot to cover. A lot of players out with high ankle sprains. Those kept coming up the other day, but excited to talk the fallout from these injuries.
Well, we will get into those injuries first and foremost. Let's do our injury roundup, and we start off with Adam Hutchinson's article. We're going to discuss each injury. John, you're going to kind of break down the fantasy impact here, and Sam, of course, adding some intel as well. But why don't we start off with perhaps the most significant injury, not to minimize any of these other injuries, but Breece Hall, ACL, he's out for the year. The Jets' talented running back that was headed really for Offensive Rookie of the Year now might set up well for Kenneth Walker of Seattle to win that award. But John, when you're talking about Breece Hall being out, this obviously opens up the door for Michael Carter Jr., who was that 2 to Breece Hall's 1-2 punch. But James Robinson was acquired from Jacksonville. But let's talk first about the Breece Hall injury and what the impact is on Michael Carter.
Obviously, it's a devastating injury for anybody who had Hall rostered. He was trending up, looking like an RB1 rest of the way. So really, really tough situation. We're going to talk about Michael Carter and James Robinson a little bit later in the rankings debate. So I don't want to get too much into that. But yes, Michael Carter is the direct replacement, especially for this week. It might get a little fuzzier down the line, but we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Sam, any comments on Breece Hall?
No, I do think it's, again, it really sucks. He was looking like the best rookie across all positions, like you mentioned, and just a terrible injury. I do think there is some upside for Michael Carter moving forward, but like John said, we'll talk about that a little bit more. It's nice. I'll be able to refer to John as John this time because I don't have 2 Johns that I'm talking about.
1 week only. 1 week only.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into Mike Williams. So Mike Williams, Sam had mentioned a lot of high ankle sprains. Well, this is one of them. Mike Williams, wide receiver, obviously for the Chargers, high ankle sprain, looking like a 4 to 6 week injury typically. John, talk about Josh Palmer and his potential fantasy upside.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, Josh Palmer is a candidate to replace him. He's did not really grab a hold of the number 2 job that well when Keenan Allen went out. I think there's some competition there with DeAndre Carter and Gerald Everett. Palmer, I believe, is out with this last week with a concussion, so I would assume he'd be back this week. But I don't think he's like a no-brainer plug and play for Mike Williams. You could see Carter or somebody else have a bigger game than Palmer, but I think he is a decent sneaky start given the likely uptick in targets and playing time.
All right, let's discuss DK Metcalf since we're talking about wide receivers now. And again, we're breaking down Adam Hutchinson's training room Week 7 injury updates as they impact fantasy managers for Week 8. But DK Metcalf dealing now with a tendon tear, a patella tendon tear, typically 2 to 3 weeks. Marquise Goodwin, though, he comes in last week, and that Seattle offense continues to roll. He catches 2 touchdown passes from Geno Smith. Is Marquise Goodwin obviously a streaming option, John? But do you think that Marquise Goodwin could be a reliable option now with Metcalf on the shelf for the next?
I think in the short term he's a decent spot start, sneaky start, somebody worthwhile, and as a wide receiver 3 flex type player in 12-team leagues. I wouldn't say he's trustworthy, but last week he did come in 4 for 6. You alluded to it. You got the 2 touchdowns, but he had four catches for 67 yards and 5 targets. And I think in a normal year, a normal Geno Smith year, we aren't talking about him as somebody you want to start, but Geno's playing really well. That passing attack's doing really well. So, a player like Goodwin can come in and produce for a short span.
Moving on to the big tight end news, and that's all fantasy managers need is a tight end injury because the position is so thin as it is. But David Njoku of the Browns suffered a high ankle sprain. This one's kind of devastating for not only the Browns, but obviously fantasy managers. When you're looking at David Njoku's production, he's been really stellar. So he's dealing with a high ankle sprain as well, 4 weeks. Harrison Bryant would be the guy, John, that I think a lot of people would now focus on.
Yeah, he's a former John Mackey Award winner as the nation's best tight end as a senior. He had 65 catches for 1,004 yards and 7 touchdowns as a senior at Florida Atlantic. He hasn't really had any really giant games in the NFL, but he does have some talent. They have been playing him quite a few snaps in his 2+ seasons, so he should step into a much larger role. And Jacoby Brissett does like to throw to the tight end. We knew coming into the season that he did, and eventually he did start targeting David Njoku pretty heavily, so that a lot of those targets could go over to Bryant.
And then the last bit of injury news, it's Deebo Samuel. Now he's considered day-to-day, but he's got a hamstring strain. Hamstring injuries typically can be kind of fickle. 2 to 3 weeks is the estimate of time that Deebo Samuel might miss. But again, he's quote unquote day-to-day. Ray McLeod and Juwan Jennings would be the two guys that could see an uptick in targets, John.
Yeah, this is one to keep an eye on because the team is sort of saying that he's likely to play, or at least day-to-day indicates that they're trying to indicate that he's likely to play. Whereas Adam Hutchinson certainly thinks he's going to miss time. He's saying 2 to 3 weeks. So we'll see what his practice activity this week is. It's probably going to be leaning on Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle more. And now you have Christian McCaffrey there. So I don't think they have any lack of pass catchers there, where you're going to want to run out and add a McLeod or Juwan Jennings. But one of those guys could pop up and have a good game. McLeod had the good game this last week, caught a touchdown, 65 yards. Typically Jennings is the more productive player, but McLeod's new to the team this year and had a good week 7.
All right, as we transition from the injury report now to the waiver wire, this is an opportunity where John, we'll throw a couple of questions at John, and he can kind of debate what he thinks might be the best waiver wire option. And Sam, of course, can provide some insight as well. Chuba Hubbard had a really nice game last week, and so did D'Onta Foreman. So both guys were facing a Tampa Bay defense that has been pretty stellar, and it has been in years past where you can't really run on Tampa Bay. But last week, Carolina, despite trading Christian McCaffrey, went off in that running game. So again, Chuba Hubbard and D'Onta Foreman both having big games. John, pick one long-term, though. So for rest of the season for Carolina, is it Chuba Hubbard or is it D'Onta Foreman?
Yeah, maybe Sam can comment on the workload there, or usage there in Carolina. What does he expect? But for me, coming into this game, it was really a 50-50 proposition whether or not Foreman or Hubbard would lead this backfield. I mean, Hubbard was the fill-in last year. He did okay. He didn't run the ball particularly well. I think it was under 4 yards per carry, 3.5 or something like that. Pretty good pass catcher. Then they signed Foreman in the offseason after he had a really nice stretch for the Titans, filling in for Derrick Henry. And, Foreman kind of fits the bill as the bigger bruising between the tackles back, but he can catch the ball as well. And Hubbard is more of a little bit smaller, but not too small to be the lead back. So it was interesting to see that Hubbard was deemed the starter prior to week 7, and that did come to fruition. He out-touched Foreman 10-6 through the first 3 quarters. He picked up an ankle injury. They said that he could come back in if they needed to, but they had already blown out the Bucks, or they were in run out the clock mode on the Bucks, which is just a shocking thing for me to be saying. And then Foreman got a bunch of touches in the fourth quarter. It racked up some good yardage. So based on that, I would prefer Hubbard. I think he's probably slightly ahead, and I do wonder if Foreman will outplay him to as far as running the ball and end up with some more touches towards the end of the year. But for right now, it looks like the team favors Hubbard.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I would agree with John that Hubbard is probably the safer long-term play. It's an interesting situation that we have here because it's not like one is a young up-and-coming running back that has been talented, but just doesn't really hasn't had the opportunity to break out yet. And the fact that Hubbard suffered the ankle injury late sort of muddies things a little bit because Foreman did have a slight edge in total snaps and total opportunities, but Hubbard did have a slight edge in routes run. He ran one more route, and then Foreman, and I think 3 of those routes for Foreman came after the Hubbard injury. So both of them were also extremely efficient rushing the ball, which was not expected, but they do have 2 games against the Atlanta Falcons in the next 3 weeks, and neither of them have, that much. The Falcons don't have that much standing in the way to make these guys valuable fantasy assets. So I think both of them might be able to fill in as some spot starts as we continue to go through the bye weeks. But with the Panthers leaning more on Hubbard, him being on the team longer than Foreman and being deemed the starter, I think is enough of an indication to choose Hubbard over Foreman.
Yeah, I would just add that the offensive line for the Panthers is not playing too bad at all. They're 11th in adjusted line yards at Football Outsiders, so there's better blocking there than maybe what we've been used to or what we kind of think of as Carolina offense. So maybe a little bit of upset. This is not like when McCaffrey got traded away, I was like, oh, we got two like mediocre running backs splitting in a bad offense, and it's like not somebody I want to run out and get. But what they did against the Bucs, and these offensive line stats, they look like they might be a little bit of a spot start type upside, RB3 upside for these 2 players.
All right, tight end question for you now. You got Mike Gesicki, Greg Dulcich, Juwan Johnson, Cade Otton of Tampa Bay, who really got targeted, 3 or 4 times in the second half alone. Maybe Tom Brady starts to attack the middle of the field now. And then Harrison Bryant, who we just got done talking about. So tight end spot start this week. John, who do you like out of that group?
Yeah, this week of tight ends is extremely puzzling when you get into maybe ranking 9, where I've got the number 9 tight end, which is Robert Tonyan, playing against the Bills, who are number 1 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Not a great matchup. Johnson, I have at 11, Otton at 13, Gesicki at 15, and Bryant down at 18, and Dulcich at 20. So, we might have Russell Wilson back for Dulcich. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but Dulcich has actually had 2 really good games to start his career. Gesicki's been doing pretty well. He had the 2 touchdown game when Durham Smythe was out. He is still leading the tight end group in routes run over there in Miami. He's got a pretty good quarterback and a pretty pass heavy offense, so that's appealing. We talked about Bryant. Otton, 27th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends are the Ravens, so it's a good matchup. If Cameron Brate remains out, then he's trustworthy. If Cameron Brate is back, then he maybe gets his routes sliced into by a third or half, and that's certainly a downgrade for him. And then Juwan Johnson just blew up last week with Adam Troutman sidelined with an ankle injury. And if he remains out, then I think Juwan Johnson's still an integral part of that passing game, given the fact that Michael Thomas is out, Jarvis Landry's out. So Andy Dalton right now is throwing to Kamara, Callaway, and Traquan Smith. So Juwan Johnson's a pretty appealing target for Dalton. And Vegas is 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end. So there's a number of guys that you could plug in if you have it in Njoku, or if you have a Travis Kelce this week, Gerald Everett. Those 2 are on bye. Those last 2, there's a number of guys you can plug in, and that'll be part of the Sneaky Starts article, of course.
And of course, the Sneaky Starts article we'll discuss on Friday for the Most Accurate podcast. Sam, I don't want to leave you out. Do you have any thoughts on the tight ends?
Yeah, I keep looking over this list of names, and I can find the upside case for all of them and the downside case as well. I think I would lean Harrison Bryant, given the potential game script that I think the Browns will find themselves in on Monday night against the red-hot Cincinnati Bengals. John mentioned it earlier, Jacoby Brissett is targeting tight ends at a 29.3% rate, which is third in the league behind only Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. So he does clearly like targeting tight ends. I think that offense is set up for that. And I think Bryant can immediately step in. We saw last year he had a couple of spike weeks as well in some games. So Eileen Bryant, I think second is probably Gesicki. They play the Lions this week. And one of the big things with him was when he started to break out a little bit, it seemed like it was because Durham Smythe was out, but this past week, Durham Smythe was back and Gesicki had a 75% route run rate. So that's encouraging as well. I think with Juwan Johnson, I don't know if I trust that production quite as much. Dulcich, I think, is really great too, and he's starting to come on with two, again, really solid games to start, but not sure I trust or want to get involved with that Broncos offense right now. And then Cade Otton, I'm not sure he has quite the same ceiling as these other guys as he builds trust with Tom Brady.
All right, so some quarterback question for you. Sam Ehlinger, who's now going to start, according to Frank Reich, he didn't just bench Matt Ryan for a week or two. He benched Matt Ryan for the rest of the season. He says Sam Ehlinger, the former Texas Longhorn quarterback, is going to be his starter throughout the course of the year. Is he worth rostering in a super flex? And then while we're talking about quarterbacks, might as well discuss PJ Walker of the Panthers, who, I mean, this really the first time the Panthers received good quarterback play all year came last Sunday from PJ Walker, who made some really nice passes, one to their tight end and another to DJ Moore, who, John, I know you're a big fan of. When it comes to those two quarterbacks, so streaming options wise, do you like either?
Yeah, so when a player like Ehlinger comes in, who I don't really, know a whole lot about, I tend to look at their college stats, plug it into my rookie quarterback model to get the baseline set of stats. And the best, most accurate stat that comes out of that is their projected rushing yards in an NFL game. So for Ehlinger, it's spitting out, the model is spitting out 23 rushing yards per game. He can run the ball. He ran the ball quite a bit in college. And I think that's one of the dimensions that he brings that Matt Ryan, as you know, Anthony, is a longtime Falcons fan. You know that Matt Ryan is not the most mobile guy, especially at this age. But the other thing I like to look at when trying to assess a quarterback is the preseason stats. Now, everything, the preseason is going to look better than what it really is because of the nature of the offense and defense, kind of vanilla defenses. He's also playing as a second, third string quarterback against second and third stringers. But with that said, I think he appeared in 3 preseason games. He completed 24 of 29 passes for 289 yards. That's a 9.97 yards per attempt. He had 4 touchdowns and no interceptions. He also added 71 yards rushing on 6 carries. So that is about a game's worth of work. If you look at the pass attempts, 29, 6 carries, that's roughly 35 dropbacks, maybe a sack or 2. That's, roughly a game's worth of work. So obviously really strong numbers there in the preseason. Those are all going to be downgraded as he gets into a real NFL action, but at least he showed he was competent, pretty accurate in that game. His rookie season numbers are harder to find. It's hard to find preseason stats, Anthony, I'll be honest with you. But when you can find them, couldn't find any rushing numbers, but the passing numbers were not as good. And I think he had 3 interceptions and no touchdowns. So just, buyer beware. I do think to answer your question, in Superflex, everybody's worth rostering that's a starting quarterback generally. It depends on the size of the league. If it's 12, certainly. If it's 10, maybe or maybe not. You might, have a starter that's sitting out there in the waiver wire. And then 2 quarterback leagues, even more so. But, Superflex, you can get away with starting a different position in that flex, whereas 2 quarterbacks, you obviously need to start 2 quarterbacks. So I think he's worth a shot given the talent that they have at receiver, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce. We got 3 tight ends that they run out there. Paris Campbell's coming on. They got Ashland Doolin coming back from injury at some point. So I definitely think it's worth it given his ability to rush the ball as well. As for Walker, like I had already written him off after just a couple of games of action, but he did really well against the Buccaneers, and I did see some nice passes that he threw highlight wise, and didn't make any mistakes. I think he had a really bad touchdown to interception ratio coming into that game, and just shocked that they won. That they won against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, that's just a shocking game given the fact that they lost Christian McCaffrey the week before. So I think Walker is probably somebody you add, but I wouldn't be as aggressive with Ehlinger because Ehlinger is the rest of the season, whereas Walker, we think he's sort of auditioning for the job rest of the season. You still have Baker Mayfield trying to come back from his ankle injury, and Sam Darnold trying to come back as well.
Yeah, it's interesting with Ehlinger. You can understand the idea behind Frank Reich saying, okay, I designed 2 game plans for Matt Ryan the last 2 weeks in which he only had to throw the ball 2 feet because his arm shot. And I don't mean any disrespect to Ryan as a long Falcon sufferer. I mean, Matt Ryan was the best quarterback that the franchise has ever had. But the fact remains his arm strength has gone down each and every year following the Super Bowl. So get a little mobility behind a Colts offensive line that has been terrible this season. So again, you can kind of understand the thought process there. Sam, any thoughts on these quarterbacks, or should we move on to the rankings debate?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ehlinger, in a Superflex league specifically, in a 1 quarterback league, you're probably not starting either of these guys. But Ehlinger, I think, offers a little bit more upside because of his rushing. PJ Walker doesn't really have that right now as part of his game. In college, Ehlinger ran 554 times for over 1,900 rushing yards and 33 rushing touchdowns. So again, Anthony, you mentioned the offensive line. They're allowing a bit of pressure, which is what's going to drive Ehlinger out of the pocket and scrambling on some of those plays. I think the playmakers that both the Panthers and the Colts are about even, if not giving a slight edge to Indianapolis. So I would prefer Ehlinger. Again, sounds like he has a little bit more job security than Walker does right now, but neither one is all that inspiring.
Yeah, it always comes with a caution, right? Like, hey, we're talking about 2 guys that if you're in some trouble here, here's some thoughts on. But context is king. All right, guys, let's do our rankings debate now. I'll throw a couple questions at John and Sam again. Feel free to chime in at the end. But where does, and you mentioned this before, John, so now's the time to get into this. So where does Michael Carter rank rest of season for you? And then how does James Robinson impact both players? Because he was acquired from Jacksonville. He fell out of favor, and rightfully so, because Travis Etienne he's been fantastic the last couple of weeks. He's a clear RB1 with the Jaguars. When it comes to Michael Carter, though, again, rest of the season, and then what's James Robinson? How does this impact the situation in New York?
Yeah, just to put a bow on that, Travis Etienne, he really moved up in the rest of season rankings. Has virtually no competition right now. He's at RB12 in my rest of season rankings, and you can maybe argue a spot higher ahead of Aaron Jones. It looks like he's going to be the bell cow, or at least the lead back in that offense the rest of the way. Carter's in a different issue because I think if this James Robinson trade hadn't gone down, then I look at him as the clear lead back, probably 15 to 20 touches per game. In the 15 games where he's seen at least 9 carries, he's averaged 14.5 touches for 71 yards, 0.4 touchdowns. Looked at him as an RB2 moving forward, middle range type, Raheem Mostert, Najee Harris in that range. The James Robinson thing is interesting because James got off to a good start this season, running the ball well, but over the last 2 or 3 weeks has been really inefficient with his touches, and that's why he basically went to the bench and they decided to feature Etienne. Now the Jets are trading for him, and so you wonder how quickly, number one, is he going to get up to speed and start potentially eating into Carter's workload, and 2, will he eat into Carter's workload, or is Carter that much better? I mean, Carter was pretty good last year, not good enough that they wouldn't go out and draft Breece Hall. But he was, good fantasy asset last year for sure. They also have Ty Johnson as the the third back there. So I don't think Carter's available on waiver wire, but I would view him as a low end RB2, and James Robinson is more of an RB3, RB4, kind of in that Antonio Gibson, Damian Harris, Donta Foreman range, as a player who could emerge as an RB2 if there's an injury or something shifts with the depth chart.
Sam, any thoughts on the Jets running back situation without Breece Hall?
Yeah, I do agree with John that I think Carter's probably closer to a high-end running back 3 right now. The Jets have leaned more run-heavy over the past several weeks with Zach Wilson in the lineup, so that helps his prospects a little bit more. And he was being treated like the starter at the beginning of the season as well, was getting more opportunities than Breece Hall was, and then the Jets sort of realized that Hall is the better player. But you mentioned Ty Johnson. I think he'll get involved a little bit in the passing game. He's been with the Jets for a couple of years now, and I just think if they were comfortable with Carter moving forward, they don't make this trade for James Robinson. So I honestly wouldn't be shocked if Carter's workload stayed about the same, and Robinson and Johnson sort of split the workload that Hall was getting. So it's one of those offenses that with potentially three running backs splitting the workload, I'm not sure how much I want to invest in them. But Carter clearly the lead guy right now, and I think has some upside rest of season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, Sam. Maybe we can make a note and we'll look at the pass rate, rush rate this week versus previous weeks. Now that Breece Hall is out, because I wonder if they're going run heavy because Breece Hall is their best player, and now they have to.
Yeah.
They maybe view Carter as an average player or above average player instead of a superstar, and they have to throw the ball a little bit more with Zach Wilson. This might ultimately help this passing game if they let Zach Wilson throw the ball a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, John. John, I don't know who wrote this question. I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but this has got to sting just a little bit. How many quarterbacks should we start over Aaron Rodgers this week as they get ready to take on your Packers? Get ready to take on the Bills.
To answer your wondering question, that was me that wrote that, and so it is sort of I don't know what that's called, self-flagellation.
Yeah.
Sure. This is tough. This is probably the lowest I've ever ranked Aaron Rodgers. I've got him at 20. He's got a bad matchup against the Bills, who are number 2 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So now, is there a potential for a good game? Yes, he's a Hall of Fame player. The Bills are going to likely score a lot of points on what's a very up and down, inconsistent Packer defense. And he could have a really good second half if they take their foot off the gas a little bit defensively, and he's just chucking the ball around and gets hot. That is the only way that I see this happening right now. Watching this team play, I don't think that they can beat the Bills, and I like the spread is 10.5, and I would lay that in a minute if I was able to bet legally in California. Yes, on 27, prop 27, please, if you're out there in California. So there's 19 quarterbacks. I'm not going to list them all, but if you look at the rankings, there's quite a few guys that are very suspect players. Andy Dalton, but he has Vegas 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Marcus Mariota at least runs the ball against Carolina. I think even Matthew Stafford, who struggled a lot in a better matchup against the 49ers. Not a great matchup, but at least it's better. I would take all those guys. Justin Fields in maybe the worst matchup against Dallas. They're first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. I would take Fields just because he's been playing well lately and is likely going to be trailing, and they might have to throw the ball a little bit. So there's quite a few players I have Rodgers one spot ahead of Ehlinger. So we're in uncharted territory here.
Yeah, Sam, I think if the Aaron Rodgers comeback train, if that was going to get moving, it would have got moving last week in Washington, right?
Right. And again, you mentioned Sam Ehlinger right behind Rodgers. I mean, if you told me that Ehlinger was going to rush the ball, say 8 times in this game, I'd probably take Ehlinger over Rodgers. it's kind of crazy because some of the underlying stats for Rodgers haven't been that bad. His fantasy value has always been driven off of his efficiency. He has a 4.5% touchdown rate, which isn't bad by any means. That's around league average, but he's usually up at the 6% mark for his career. Across all quarterbacks, he's fourth in on-target percent, but is 33rd in dropped pass percent. So if you listen to some of the comments he made this week, I think on the Pat McAfee show, he talked about some players that need to get benched because they're not playing that well. I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. But again, outside of the drop passes, he has played decently. Again, like he does not look like he has the past 2 seasons that he's won the MVP, but the ceiling is so much lower for him at this point than it has been in any other season in his career. The Packers were a pretty pass heavy team last year, and that has changed a little bit as well. So again, if you have Rodgers in a 1 quarterback league, you're looking for other options, and I think there are plenty out on the waiver wire right now.
Yeah.
All right, last one.
I would just add that, with Rodgers, like it was not an indictment of Rodgers, and I would agree with Sam that he's actually playing okay. If you take away the week 1 against the Vikings, which was an absolute disaster, he's like quarterback 12 fantasy wise, and he was being drafted QB 13, QB 11, depending on where you were at. So he's sort of, in the last, since week 1, like if you exclude his worst week, which is not really fair, but if you do, he's playing all right. That's not the issue. I think what we've seen from Romeo Doubs over the last couple of weeks has not lived up to his preseason expectations. He's in his own kitchen about the drops. The other thing that's playing into this week is Allen Lazard is not even a sure thing to play. He's the most trusted receiver there. So there's just so many factors going into this game that it just doesn't look great for Rodgers. And I just don't think the wheels could come off this week, and it's going to be on national television. And like this could either be he has 3 touchdowns and 300 yards in a wild comeback attempt, or they get rolled 40-3 and he's not playing in the 4th quarter. We'll see.
Man, I'm used to the like, hey, this player is going against your Falcons, so this is a great spot. Now we're talking about Packers. I never thought we'd get here, John. All right, let's do one more rankings debate. Make the case for Daniel Jones over Dak Prescott in Week 8.
Yeah, I think this was a Sal question, and I appreciate it, Sal, our wonderful producer. I think the first week back for Dak was kind of a low volume passing attack, and the matchup against the Bears, the Bears are bad against the run. They're better against the pass than they are against the run. So I would expect a lot of Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. They're 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. They're only 11th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. I think this will be kind of a low, slow game between these two teams. Chicago likes to take the air out of the ball, run the ball over and over and over again. So that's part of the reason that Prescott's at 12 and I have Jones at 8. And like the pitch for Jones is that he is the fantasy quarterback 9 right now. 17 points per game. He's running the ball really well. Had a big running game last week, but he's averaging, 49 yards and 0.43 rushing touchdowns per game. His receiving core is getting a little bit healthier with Wan'Dale Robinson. He's found something with Darius Slayton. He's obviously got Saquon Barkley. He can throw the ball too. He did lose his tight end, which is tough. Ehlinger had been playing pretty well, so that's a weapon that he's lost. But if you look at the Seattle matchup, they're 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. They've given up 262 yards on average, 1.4 touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks this season. So and then you have Kyler Murray, who just ran for 100 yards on him. So if he can have one of his 80 yard games, I think right there you're probably moving him ahead of Prescott. But then he's also getting 220, 240 and a touchdown or two in a passing game against a pretty good Seattle offense where there's going to might be a shootout is one of the higher totals on the week. That's why I would put Jones in over Prescott. I think Prescott better long term, but this week I would go with Jones.
Yeah, Sam, it seemed like Dallas last week did what they had to do to win the game, not necessarily put up fantasy numbers, which makes sense. But when it was Cooper Rush in, it was kind of a similar format here. Let's run the ball. If we run the ball effectively, make smart throws, great, and let's just win the game. And maybe that's the way Dallas does things with Dak Prescott for a while.
Yeah, that very well could be, and we're going to talk about the Cowboys passing in a little bit here. And I think the case for Daniel Jones is the rushing. There are only two quarterbacks in the league right now that are rushing for more yards than him. It's Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields. So, I mean, he's got 5 rushing touchdowns on the season. Like, this is a part of Daniel Jones' skill set that Brian Daboll has finally unlocked, and it's really great to see. Like, they're leaning into that aspect of his athleticism, and it's working because they don't really have many other playmakers outside of Saquon Barkley. Again, some of the receivers, like John mentioned, are getting healthier, which helps him in the passing game, but he just has 6 passing touchdowns on the season. But again, we know that the rushing creates such a high floor and a high ceiling for quarterbacks in fantasy football. And Dak just does not have that right now. He's scrambled a little bit in the past, but it's not like they're really calling designed rushes for him. So with the Cowboys being a little bit more cautious, like you mentioned, this Giants Seahawks game is probably the best game on the slate right now. It's one I'm really looking forward to, in that Seahawks defense has not been outstanding. They've improved a little bit the past couple of weeks, but still have plenty of holes to exploit as well. So I'd be really excited about Daniel Jones if I had him on my team right now.
Yeah, things you never thought you'd say, right? I'm excited about the Seahawks-Giants matchup between Geno Smith and Daniel Jones, but I'm with you, Sam. They've been very entertaining this year, especially in the fourth quarters. Justin Fields will highlight our buy low and or sell high trade advice. So, Sam, why don't we get into Justin Fields right now? A QB8 over the last 4 weeks. Time to sell high or hold on Justin Fields?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it depends on where you're at with the quarterback position. If you have Rodgers, I'd probably prefer Fields rest of season right now. With the way he's looking, they're starting to design more or have more designed rushes for Fields, which is great. It's not just all of his rushing production coming on scrambles. He had 23 fantasy points this past week, which was a season high for him. His fantasy point total has increased in each of the last 4 weeks. And I think it's one of those, again, with the quarterback position, it's tough to sell high or buy low, really. The elite guys are the elite guys. But if you've been in a position where you're sort of filtering through some of the lower end quarterbacks, Fields looks like he's playing a lot better. The Bears have also thrown the ball just a tad more. They're still the most run heavy team in the NFL by far, but Justin Fields has been a little bit more efficient passing the ball as well. So I think if you've been in that position where you've been looking for a starter at quarterback, Justin Fields can be that guy, I think, for the next couple of weeks going forward.
John, I thought that that Monday night performance out of Justin Fields was his best. I thought there was a couple of times there where, it's been like one read, get the ball out or run or take a sack. And I thought he was doing a better job with his progressions and things like that. But it's still only one performance. What's your thoughts on Justin Fields?
Well, it's a shocking performance against a Patriots defense, which has been really stingy overall, but had a bad night, and it was at New England too, which is crazy to me. But looking at his upcoming schedule, he has a really bad matchup this week against Dallas. You could still see him putting together a good fantasy performance if they actually throw the ball, trying to come back. I don't know how run heavy they'll go. I'm sure they'll try to stay run heavy, but it might be tough. But if if they're throwing the ball and he's dropping back, there's more scrambles available, and if he's getting 8, 12, 14 carries like the last 3 weeks, then he's got a nice floor. Then you look ahead, week 9, Miami, 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Week 10, Detroit, 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. And week 11, Anthony, your Falcons, 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So I had to get that in there. So if you're going to, if you maybe want to move him, you might want to wait until after week 11. And then he's got the Jets and the Packers, who are both top 10 in that metric. Then he's got a bye. Then he's got Philly and Buffalo week 15 and week 16. before a really nice matchup in week 17. So really, he's got 3 great matchups after this Dallas matchup, then 4 bad matchups plus a bye, and then a good matchup. So I would probably wait, ride him out through Atlanta, and if you wanted to make a switch at that point, that would be the time to do it.
You did not have to mention that, John. I felt like you wanted to mention that, but no. They're prime for the taking. All right, moving on now, Sam. Aaron Jones, 24.1 half PPR points in week 7. Had the 2 touchdowns off the reception, obviously. Had a combined 27.9 in weeks 4 through 6. Is Aaron Jones somebody that you're holding on right now, or maybe looking to either buy or sell?
I think he's someone I'm holding on to for sure. I believe we talked about the Packers running backs a little bit last week, and I was buying Aaron Jones a little bit. It seems like it doesn't seem like his workload is more game script proof than AJ Dillon's. Now the Packers were in a pretty neutral game script for the whole game, but rarely do you see games where Aaron Jones is just sort of phased out of the entire offense. Jones doesn't have a single game with fewer than 10 total opportunities in a game this season. AJ Dillon has games of 6 and 4 opportunities in 2 of the last 3 weeks, which is not that great. The past couple of weeks, it had sort of looked like Jones was getting phased out of the passing game as well. He had season low totals in routes run at 38 and 39% in weeks 4 and 5, but that shot up to a season high 62% routes run rate in week 7. So again, this is sort of what we've been looking for from the Packers for a while, of getting Jones involved in the passing game, because he has that ability. And I think now they start relying on him a little bit more and continue to get him involved. And AJ Dillon's still worth holding on to right now, but again, I don't think he hits that ceiling unless Aaron Jones goes down with an injury.
John, you have intimate knowledge of Green Bay. Do you concur with Sam in that it looks like Aaron Jones is going to be somebody that is worth leaning on for the Packers over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, intimate knowledge is one way to put it. Yeah, I mean, I think Jones is a hold. He doesn't have a lot of great matchups coming up. Buffalo's a bad one, but then he's got Detroit in week 9. Dallas, Tennessee, and Philly are neutral to bad, and then Chicago before their week 14 bye. But you just look at his workload. I'm going backwards. He has 17, 12, 15, 19, 15, 18 touches, and then he had that week 1 where they he was actually pretty effective, but they went away from him. He had 8 touches in week 1 in that horrible game against the Vikings. So since then, they've been really good about getting him at least 12 touches. And he is going to have the occasional dud, but most running backs that aren't elite in terms of their usage are going to have the occasional dud. And he obviously has the trust of Rodgers in the passing game. We showed that last week. 9 catches for 53 yards, 2 touchdowns, 10 targets. And as these other pass catchers either get dinged up or losing their own confidence or whatever, then he's going to continue to see a lot of targets. And just I've seen people ask about cutting AJ Dillon. Yeah, he's not what we thought. This offense is not what we thought. We thought it was going to be more productive than this. We thought that he would have some flex, RB2 value if they were scoring more touchdowns, but they're not. So he has now sort of been demoted to injury, upside attrition play, like somebody you hold on to. He has a lot of value if Aaron Jones goes down. So God forbid that happen, but he's not somebody that I would send to the waiver wire in most leagues, because most of those players that have that type of upside are already rostered.
All right, we'll wrap up with a game here, at least with the buy low game here. But buy, sell, hold. Sam, you got Michael Pittman, you got Paris Campbell, Alec Pierce. Pick one to trade, trade for. Pick one to trade for, one to keep, and then one to trade away.
So I think I'm going to hold and keep Michael Pittman. He's the wide receiver 1 on that team. Doesn't have a healthy game below 22% target share. Excuse me, he has 1 game below a 22% target share. I'm going to trade away and sell Paris Campbell. I just don't know if I believe in him continuing to get the target workload that he's got. And I'm going to buy Alec Pierce because we talked about the rushing and scrambling ability with Sam Ehlinger. If he is able to move and get out of the pocket, that's going to give Pierce more time to develop those downfield routes that he's running. He's clearly sort of the deep threat for this offense. So he's going to have more boom bust weeks than these other two guys. But if you're looking for a potential flex fill in, I think he's got a bit of a higher ceiling than Campbell.
John,
Yeah,
do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you're going to come to me there, but yes, I would almost the same way. I would say Pittman is more of a buy, and then Pierce is a hold. But that's just to switch things up on Sam. I definitely agree with him that Campbell, it just seems like smoke and mirrors right now. This is a player that has not been productive really his entire career. He's had 2 good games. Maybe this continues. I know he's been injured throughout his career, and maybe he's getting it going. But I was looking at his numbers all season, just running routes, not getting any targets, and all of a sudden, last 2 games now he's. They stuck with him to their credit as a starter, but last 2 weeks he's gotten some good workload. But looking ahead at this offense, they had a 30th just for fantasy points allowed matchup against receivers against Tennessee. They got 31st this week against Washington, 18th the Patriots, 29th. Against Vegas. So it'll be really interesting to see. You really can't ask for a whole lot more if you're the Colts and Sam Ehlinger and trying to get this offense jump started in terms of passing game. But I would be going after Pittman given his workload and just kind of touchdown. He's due for a touchdown. He's had one in week 1, last 5 games, no touchdowns, but he's seeing 10.2 targets per game. So the usage is certainly there.
Yeah, a little behind the scenes for you, John. I whiffed twice on my mute, so that's why I paused there instead of throwing to you. So, all right, so let's go to the notable usage trends, potential top starts and top sits. Sam, I know that you do a great job. If you go to 4for4.com, you can check out the usage charts that Sam puts together, team pass rate over expectation by week. You can see the graphic here. Sam does an excellent job with this. So the 3 teams we wanted to highlight, Sam: Baltimore Ravens, my Atlanta Falcons, and then the Dallas Cowboys. And Sam, take it away with your findings here.
Yeah, so we'll start off with the Baltimore Ravens. In the first 4 weeks of the season, it sort of looked like they had a new offensive identity. They were passing the ball quite a bit more than they had in years past. They had a 4.7 pass rate over expectation. Their rushing game just wasn't really getting it done outside of Lamar Jackson. But over the past 3 weeks, they have a negative 7.2% pass rate over expectation, which is the 6th lowest rate in the league over that span. You can see their chart in the top right here has just sort of fallen off over the past several weeks. In week 7, they hit a season low, negative 19.8% pass rate over expectation. And even with a game against the Bucs, who just got trampled by the Panthers on Thursday night, it looks like the Ravens will be acting more like we had expected them to heading into the season. So I think that really only makes probably Mark Andrews, Gus Edwards, obviously Lamar Jackson, and maybe Rashad Bateman, if he's healthy, reliable starters this week and potentially going forward. The Atlanta Falcons, I've done enough complaining about them and their passing on Twitter this week. I mean, being down 14-0 to the Bengals and throwing the ball 13 times, it doesn't make sense. You have to sit, I think, Drake London. At this point, he has just 5 targets over the last 2 games. And again, there's no reason we've seen that no game script is really going to make the Falcons pass the ball more. If it wasn't this Sunday, then it's likely not going to be the same in the future. They play the Panthers in in 2 of the next 3 weeks. So again, those should be games that they should be competitive in and will likely rely on running the ball. I think some of the options that we mentioned at tight end earlier are better than Kyle Pitts right now. I mean, it sucks that we've reached that point, but the volume just isn't there. And that's what you need from the tight end position. And then finally, the Dallas Cowboys, again, didn't pass the ball a ton in week 7 with Dak back. But they did have about a 0% pass rate over expectation. So they passed the ball as much as one would expect given the game script that they had. It was their highest single game rate of the season. So I think this lends itself to the Cowboys starting to pass the ball a little bit more with their franchise quarterback under center. They have the Bears this week, followed by a bye, and then get the Packers, Vikings, Giants, and Texans coming out of it. So even if they aren't throwing the ball a ton against teams like Chicago and maybe Houston, the efficiency, I think, should be there enough for these pass catchers to continue to have some fantasy value.
Yeah, Sam, just to chime in 2 seconds there about the Falcons. They were down 20 points to the Buccaneers in the third quarter and said, we're going to run the football here. We're going to run out the clock. And nearly came back. So that's just more justification for them. Like, we'll just continue to run the ball, period. Yeah. John, any thoughts on these 3 teams?
Yeah, I would just say that to a little peek at how the sausage is made. When I do the projections every week, the equations want to pull teams like this up into normal range. There's a few teams where I have to like specifically go in, look at their pass run rate and change their projections, just the whole kit and caboodle, because they're just so run heavy. Atlanta's at the top of that list. Chicago, Tennessee, Baltimore, and the Eagles are specifically teams that I have to really adjust that run pass in terms of attempts. So it's like sometimes I'll get some wild rankings, and then I'll go through and do all that. And then, like, to mention Kyle Pitts, yeah, he came in as a low end tight end too this week, just based on historical volume, the volume of this passing attack, and we just can't even count on a negative game script potentially increasing passing for the Falcons. I think maybe we could look at the Bears trending up in terms of pass attempts. If they fall down 14, 21 points against the Cowboys, they may go pass heavier than usual, but I don't think we can say that same thing about the Falcons.
All right, guys. Any other thoughts, John? Any other notes that you wanted to highlight before we sign off today?
Yeah, I think that just make sure you check out Sneaky Starts. Is with a couple of teams on bye and all these injuries, there's going to be some good ideas in there. And I did have somebody say Romeo Doubs was so sneaky that he didn't score a point in the Discord last week, and I said I deserve that. I did think that he was going to do better and have a breakout game or at least a decent game against the Commanders, who are so bad at the cornerback position and passing game. But it's rough. The Packers are a rough offense right now. And then I'll do my chat on Discord every Thursday afternoon. So get on that, and then just keeping up with rankings over the weekend. Sam, what do you have going on?
Yeah, had the new Hoppen to Conclusions come out this morning. Have the breakout model article coming tomorrow morning, and then, as always, the charts will be flowing over on Twitter.
Well, excellent. Make sure that you check out at Sam Hoppen, at 4for4_John, and at 4for4football, because we've got all our content that we tweet out. Of course, make sure you have a subscription to 4for4.com. You get all of John's rankings, all of Sam's great content as well. DFS, season long betting. We got you covered at 4for4. John Daigle should be back next week, but guys, I had a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys having me host today.
Thanks for coming on, Anthony. It's always nice to be able to pull you out of the bullpen.
Yeah, likewise. And as John Daigle would always say, be a little bit kinder than what's required.
There you go. That's great advice. All right, for John Paulsen and Sam Hoppen, I'm Anthony Stalter. We'll see you next time on the Most Accurate Podcast.